Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be doing my top waiver wire ads for week number 1 of the 2022 fantasy football season. Inside today's video, I'll be going in depth and discussing 5 running backs that I want to add, 5 wide receivers that I want to add, as well as 2 tight ends and 2 quarterbacks that I want to be adding prior to week 1 of the 2022 fantasy football season. But before we get into this waiver wire deep dive, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help us out a ton. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at Notorious FNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 1 waiver wire ads. We begin this waiver wire breakdown with the running back position headlined by Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins going up against the New England Patriots this week at home in Miami. Mostert right now is currently owned in 52.6% of leagues on NFL.com. If you play on Yahoo, ESPN Sleeper, any of those other fantasy football platforms, then the ownership percentage is going to be slightly different. Now, Raheem Mostert was a player that I definitely liked drafting at the end of fantasy football drafts this offseason. Raheem Mostert, while he is the number 2 running back on the Dolphins, it's pretty clear at this point that Chase Edmonds is going to be the number 1 guy. Raheem Mostert still has that humongous big game potential because of how fast he is. This team is going to want to run the ball. This Miami Dolphins offense is centered around speed. There's a reason why they paid the price to get Tyreek Hill. It's because they want to be very fast. And I believe head coach Mike McDaniel knows exactly how to use Raheem Mostert because he knew exactly how to use him in San Francisco prior to him getting hurt. Now, Raheem Mostert is a big injury concern, but at the end of the day, when this man is healthy, his upside is super big. Up against the New England Patriots, the Dolphins could put up potentially a higher scoring game. Now, I'm not advocating that Raheem Mostert is a must-start player, but I definitely think he is someone that you want to pick up off the waiver wire and see what happens week 1, because this really could be a closer split between Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert than most of us think, and Raheem Mostert would be a top-of-the-line waiver wire ad next week in week number 2, if that is the case. So Raheem Mostert is my number 1 running back to pick up this week. At number 2, we have Darrell Henderson, running back of the LA Rams, going up against the Buffalo Bills this week. 39.5% owned for Darrell Henderson. Now, Darrell Henderson and Cam Akers, this is going to be one of the more confusing backfields going into the season because Sean McVay said this is a 1A, 1B scenario with Darrell Henderson and Cam Akers being the 1A, Darrell Henderson being the 1B. This is going to be an offense that looks to utilize 2 backs because Sean McVay, head coach of the team, even said that they feel as though they have 2 starting running backs on the team. Now, how close is this split going to be? Because last year, even though Cam Akers fucking tore his Achilles, when he came back, they were just handing the ball to Cam Akers like he was 100% healthy and he was the clear workhorse on the team. So the question at hand here is, was Sean McVay lying to us? Is Cam Akers very clearly the workhorse running back, or is this going to be a closer split share? If it is a closer snap share between the two, then Darrell Henderson could be viable week in and week out, and in my opinion, he is one of the better handcuffs in fantasy football, so if he's available in your league, I would definitely look to scoop him up. Next up, we move to J.D. McKissic, running back of the Washington Commanders, going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in week number 1, 19.7% owned. I know everyone who's pumped for week number 1 is fucking so excited. They can't even sleep versus the Jacksonville Jaguars matchup. That is just making my eyes ejaculate thinking about it. Now, Brian Robinson sadly ended up getting shot, but it does appear that Brian Robinson might be able to play a couple of weeks into the season. I'm not saying he's going to come back in week 5, but maybe he plays at some point this season. But right now, there's a very clear hierarchy on this Washington football team's running back room. It is going to be Antonio Gibson and then J.D. McKissic. We have seen J.D. McKissic get heavily involved in terms of pass catching with head coach Ron Rivera in the past. My question with J.D. McKissic is, how useful will he be in that role with Carson Wentz? Because I thought last year Nyheim Hines is going to see a decent amount of dump-offs, and that wasn't necessarily the case because Carson Wentz isn't this dump-off specialist. So we shall see in 2022, in week number 1, how often J.D. McKissic is used, as well as how often Carson Wentz is going to look to dump him off the ball. If he does kind of switch up a little bit and try to dump the ball off a little bit more, I think J.D. McKissic could be a very valuable player on your roster for your 2022 fantasy football teams. Next up, we move to Zamir White, running back of the Las Vegas Raiders, going up against the LA Chargers this week. 2% owned for Zamir White. Now, the running back hierarchy in Las Vegas is also pretty clear in my opinion. Number 1 is Josh Jacobs, number 2 is Zamir White, and number 3 is Amir Abdullah. They let go of Kenyon Drake, who is now in Baltimore with the Ravens. So Zamir White is pretty much the clear number 2. I think even the team knows that Josh Jacobs is better than Zamir White. The question is this team going to look to use this final year of the contract with Josh Jacobs by just running him a million times, right? Just let him go loose, let him run the ball a million times, and then next year we will shift to Zamir White as the lead back on the team? Or is this going to be what it seems like it's going to be, where Josh Jacobs and Zamir White are both playing a decent amount? And if that is the case, Zamir White's a guy you could have drafted in like the 13th round of your league, or a guy that you could just pick up off the waiver wire right now, because apparently most people have not heard about Zamir White. I really think Zamir White is an incredibly talented player, and if this Raiders offense is as fantastic as people project, and if they do look to split the carries between Jacobs and Zamir White, then White could be a very valuable fantasy football asset. And I think I've called all these guys valuable, but you get the point. Zamir White does have a decent amount of upside in Las Vegas with the Raiders if this is a close split share with him and Josh Jacobs. The final running back to discuss before we pivot into the wide receivers is Mike Davis, running back of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the New York Jumbo Jets in MetLife. 1.4% ownership for Mike Davis. Now, J.K. Dobbins is telling everyone on Twitter, I'm not limping. That's fake, right? I wasn't limping. I watched the clip. The motherfucker looked like he was limping. Now, could J.K. Dobbins be fully healthy week 1 and take the Jets out to dinner and just butt fuck them raw right after, right? That is entirely possible because J.K. Dobbins is immensely talented. But there's also another scenario where J.K. Dobbins isn't fully healthy. Gus Edwards is on the PUP, and we see either Mike Davis or Kenyon Drake really step up. Now, I don't think it will be Drake instantly because he just signed with the team a couple of days ago, and Mike Davis has been there all summer long. So I think Mike Davis is in a pretty solid position here. Now, would I start him in my lineup week 1? No, probably not. The matchup is juicy against the Jets, but we have to see what happens with Dobbins. Is Dobbins actually hobbled like I believe, or is Dobbins 100% healthy? Because if he's 100% healthy, then you can just cut Mike Davis at the end of the week. But if he isn't healthy, then Mike Davis may be seeing a lot more usage than you would expect in this offense with the Baltimore Ravens. So now we're going to go ahead and pivot into the wide receiver section of today's video, headlined by Jakobi Meyers, wide receiver of the New England Patriots, going up against the Miami Dolphins. In Miami, Meyers is currently owned in 13.4% of leagues on NFL.com. So Jakobi Meyers has been the sole bright spot in this offense all offseason long. This offense hasn't looked great. We saw that preseason game where Mac Jones threw an interception towards 6 Raiders defenders. We have seen reports out of camp that the fact that they don't have a true offensive coordinator is biting them in the ass, and the offense looks putrid. But even with those reports, you're seeing reports of, Jakobi Meyers flashing, looking great. Now, Jakobi Meyers last year struggled immensely to score touchdowns. This guy could not score a touchdown to save his life. It took him forever. They were balls deep into the season before Jakobi Meyers finally scored. But at the end of the day here, while I do like Devontae Parker, and I think he brings a different type of wide receiver role to this offense, I think Jakobi Meyers is the better of the two, and the fact that you can get him off the waiver wire right now is pretty crazy. Now, he might struggle week 1 up against Miami because going up against Xavier Howard is going to be very, very tough. But there's also a scenario that I kind of believe is going to be the case where X isn't just shadowing Jakobi Meyers, because they still have other receivers there, and X could just cover a bunch of them. So I don't think he's necessarily going to shadow Jakobi Meyers. So Jakobi Meyers is fine in this game, but I don't love to start him up against Miami, but I do think he is worthy of a waiver wire add. The second receiver to talk about here is KJ Osborne of the Minnesota Vikings, going up against the Green Bay Packers. Osborne currently owned at 1.7% of leagues. Osborne is a pretty interesting piece in this Vikings offense because this is now a team that is going to look to go into more 3 wide receiver sets with their brand new head coach, and they're going to look to throw the ball at a higher rate. Now, the thing is, KJ Osborne's competition is fucking huge. He's dealing with Justin Jefferson as well as Adam Thielen in this offense. I know a lot of people are kind of besmirching Adam Thielen, and his ADP itself in fantasy football drafts were telling me that people don't love Adam Thielen anymore. But when Adam Thielen is healthy, the guy is fucking amazing. With that said, though, if they are going to throw the ball at a higher rate, we saw KJ Osborne last year show not greatness, right? It didn't look like KJ Osborne was the second coming of Randy Moss or Ocho Cinco or something crazy like that, but we saw the potential. We saw that he's a good enough receiver. Now, they do bring back Irv Smith, who is now going to be healthy potentially for week 1, and that's another concern for Osborne. Going up against the Green Bay Packers, I like this matchup because I think this could potentially be a very high-scoring game. I'm not telling you to start Osborne, but I do think he's certainly worthy to be picked up off the waiver wire. Next up, we move to Nico Collins of the Houston Texans going up against the Indianapolis Colts at home in Houston. Collins currently owned in 1.8% of leagues. Nico Collins is a very interesting wide receiver in Houston because while the Houston Texans technically as a team are just perceived to be complete and utter dog shit, right? This is an offense that on paper doesn't look very good. They have Brandon Cooks, they have my boy Dameon Pierce, but outside of that, things aren't looking too great. But what that does mean is that Nico Collins is the clear number 2 wide receiver in this offense. And I personally believe that Davis Mills is better than people give him credit for. Now, I'm not saying that Davis Mills is the next Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying that Davis Mills is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, because that would be stupid to say. But what I am saying is that Nico Collins' quarterback, Davis Mills, is good enough to throw the ball to Nico Collins, and Nico Collins could be a humongous red zone threat for this offense. So I think he's a pretty interesting pickup prior to week number 1. I'm not too sure that Nico Collins will have a huge splash game up against the Colts defense, but he is an interesting stash to see what his usage is like in this offense, as well as how many targets Davis Mills gives him. Next up, we move to Jahan Dotson of the Washington Commanders going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. 5.6% ownership for Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson was a first-round pick to the surprise of not necessarily many, because there were some mocks I saw where he was like pick 30 or 31, but he went pretty high in the draft compared to where people thought, and that does bode well for his usage in year 1. Now, they still have Curtis Samuel, they obviously have Mr. Scary Terry McLaurin, and now they have Carson Wentz at the quarterback position. I saw a lot of positive reports out of training camp towards Jahan Dotson because Carson Wentz has been targeting him a decent amount. Now, does training camp necessarily correlate to what's going to actually happen in week 1 and across the season? Of course not. We see these training camp darlings all the time in fantasy football get talked up. People get down on their knees, give them the metaphorical gawk, and then these players end up not being so hot. But at the end of the day here, when you're taking a shot on a rookie wide receiver off the waiver wire, you might as well take the shot on a guy that has significant or has pretty high draft capital in the NFL draft, as well as a wide receiver that is in the position to have that impact year number 1, and I think that is the case with Dotson in Washington. The final wide receiver to discuss here is Mr. Paris Campbell, wide receiver of the Colts, going up against the Houston Texans. 0.8% ownership for Campbell. Now, I like Alec Pierce and Paris Campbell a ton this season. I think week number 1 and the early season will be very telling towards the hierarchy of targets in this offense. It's pretty clear at number 1, they have Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman stood out last year with the garbage can Carson Wentz throwing him the ball. So we all believe, basically the whole fantasy football community believes, that Michael Pittman is going to take another leap up this year in 2022 with Matty Ice under center. But Matt Ryan is really fucking good. In my opinion, I think last year was not a true tell of how good Matt Ryan is. So could he elevate 2 wide receivers in this offense? I think so. Now the question is, will that be Paris Campbell? Will it be Alec Pierce? Or will it be both of them at the same time to where there isn't a clear number 2 and then you're kind of guessing every week? That's what we'll see. So up against the Houston Texans, I honestly think Paris Campbell is start-worthy this week because this game could be very high scoring in favor of the Indianapolis Colts. But before we move on into the tight end position and the quarterback position to break down in today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. They've been on the screen the whole entire time, and they are the best place to play fantasy football this summer. I know you're preparing for week number 1 right now, but you can still do some best ball drafts right now on Underdog Fantasy. The Best Ball Mania 3 tournament has $10 million in total prize money. All you got to do is draft your team, and that's it. There's no waivers, no trade trades and no in-season management, Underdog will give you your highest score at the end of each week of the season. And last year's Best Ball Mania champion drafted in June. So there is no need to wait. You can draft right now. All you gotta do is click on the link in the video description down below or use promo code Stochastic, been on your screen this whole time, STOKASTIC, to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100 with Underdog, and you'll receive our Best Ball Draft Kit for 100% free. That's a combined $170 of value with a first-time deposit of $100. Make sure you guys do go ahead and check out Underdog Fantasy. Now we'll pivot into the quarterback position with quarterback famous Jameis Winston of the New Orleans Saints going up against the Atlanta Falcons this week. Jameis is currently owned in 25.5% of leagues. One of my favorite late-round quarterback dart throws is Jameis Winston. If I'm being honest with you, I don't even think he's a dart throw. Looking back at last season, prior to his injury, Jameis Winston was looking really, really good. He wasn't throwing as many interceptions as he did in Tampa. He was looking a little bit more conservative with the ball in terms of just turning the ball over. He was still throwing the ball at a decent rate. He has amazing weapons on this team. They have Michael Thomas. Maybe Michael Thomas is good, maybe Michael Thomas is bad, but Michael Thomas is there. Rookie Chris Olave, who should be really good. Jarvis Landry, and to his right or his left, or maybe right behind him sometimes, winky face, we got Alvin Kamara. A lot of players to throw the football to. So I think Jameis Winston is pretty clearly the number one quarterback on this team. I know there's some narrative that Taysom Hill is going to be playing or something, but honestly, unless Jameis Winston gets hurt again, I really think the team is all in on famous Jameis Winston. And this matchup up against Atlanta is a very startable game. The Atlanta defense is a little bit underrated in my opinion, but I still think the Saints could blow their back out. So I like Jameis Winston a ton in week 1 up against Atlanta. The other quarterback that I like is a guy who I was just talking about. That's Matty Ice Baby, quarterback of the Colts, going up against the Houston Texans in Houston. 24.1% owned for Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan doesn't really have that much rushing upside. Neither does Jameis, but at least you can see Jameis running the ball like we've seen it before. Matt Ryan's basically a fucking statue in the pocket, but at the end of the day, I still think Matt Ryan is usable this week up against the Houston Texans. This offense is loaded. The only worry about Matt Ryan is that they blow the back out of the Houston Texans, and instead of Matt Ryan throwing like 2 or 3 touchdowns, he throws 1. Jonathan Taylor goes crazy and scores like 3. That's definitely possible. But hey, when you're looking for a streaming quarterback week 1, a good place to look, I would say, is up against the Houston Texans. So I think that Mr. Matt Ryan is a pretty solid play this week. And I also think that Jameis Winston is a pretty solid quarterback to play this week. I definitely would have them rank Jameis and then Matt Ryan, though. If I had to start just one of them, I would prefer Jameis Winston. Now we move to the final section of today's video, the tight ends. We got Robert Tonyan and David Njoku as my top tight end ads on the week. Tonyan going up against the Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota, 16.3% owned. Now Robert Tonyan is still not 100% cleared to go for week number 1. It is still not the mortal lock of the century that he plays in week number 1. But if he does, I truly believe that Aaron Rodgers relies heavily on the connection with a wide receiver or a tight end. He has a great connection with Tonyan. That's why Tonyan scored so many fucking touchdowns, not last year, but the year prior, because Tonyan was banged up last season. Tonyan is coming off the injury, but at the end of the day here, up against Minnesota in what could be a high-scoring game, that's a tight end that I'm willing to throw out there, as long as he is cleared to play. And then we got David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. His ownership is a lot higher than Tonyan, 36.6% owned. It's actually 20.3 percentage points higher. David Njoku, probably the clear number 2 target in Cleveland behind Amari Cooper, but the question is, how good is Jacoby Brissett? And as a Dolphins fan, as someone who watched Jacoby Brissett last year, I will tell you that I think Jacoby Brissett sucks absolute donkey cock at playing quarterback. But even with that said, he might just force feed the ball to David Njoku. So if you're a big pickle here, you need to start a tight end off the waiver wire, you can go with Njoku. If you want to pick up another tight end because maybe you aren't as comfortable with your number 1 tight end, then pick up Njoku. Let's see what happens week 1, because I think Njoku might be a very sought after tight end. Same thing with Tonyan after week number 1. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure to hit that like button as well as that subscribe button down below. It would help us out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at Notorious FNTSY. Make sure you check out our sponsorship of today's video, Underdog Fantasy, promo code Stochastic, again for that $100 first match deposit bonus, as well as getting our best ball draft kit for 100% free. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, good boy.